Let's start using some lights now. And the first thing we'll do is place a couple of spotlights. I'm in my Mod 14 design. You might want to start a new design for this too. First, place a block in the view in this direction. Now I'm placing one which is around 10 foot square, so that's around 3000 millimeters. There it is, there's my block. Now I'm going to go to construction at this point. So, line tool, I'm going to go from the center of the block and come out in this direction, and that also will be 10 foot. So there's my 10-foot line, and I'm going to draw another one over here. Now, let's place a light on the end of this one, pointing at the center here. Let's go back to primary. So let's start the light manager. My spotlight is already in place, but if you can't see the spotlight, then just pick on the light. Now, what it wants from us now is to define the light position. I'm assuming at the moment that everything is correct in our settings for this light. So I'm going to plop my light here. So here's the location of the light. And as soon as we do that, you see the light itself, and you see the cone that the light is generating. If you look carefully, you'll see that the cone is in two parts, and that's because we have a cone angle and a delta angle, which defines the size of the outside cone and the inside cone. So I'm going to pop that in place here, and it's going to snap to that point as the target. So data point on that point, and we're done. So the light's nicely in place there. Let's now go and render this. So I'm going to put a fence around this. So now we need to start the Luxology, and we'll go straight up to begin Luxology. So I'll click on that. We'll wait a little bit, and we see the block in there with the light on it. Now right now I've got a black background, which is a little inconvenient because you can hardly see the block. And that's because my design view has a black background. So I can do two things here. I can change the background color of the render, and I'm going to choose white. And we'll say OK. So now we can see the block quite nicely. But every time I do a render at this point, it will have a black background. So what I should really do is go into my model and workspace and preferences and view options and turn off the black so that it becomes a white background. Now it will have a white background automatically and don't have to keep changing every time I do a render. Okay, so far so good. Take a close look at the results, and we see that the spotlight is pointing directly at the center, and we see the extent of the light, which is a 30-degree angle, and the little fuzziness at the edges here. Well, that's the actual spotlight fading away into a zero light value. Now, right now we don't see anything in the center here much, even though we have a 5-degree center set, and that's because nothing's really changed here. This is typically what you'll see, this fuzzy area and the main lighting. Now, we can make this a little brighter. Let's adjust the image. And I'm going to drag my brightness setting and set that where I'd like to see it. So let's just put it there. Pretty simple to do. Now, you'll note down on the bottom line here that this render took 2 seconds, and we're in draft mode, which you should be in. That's here. Now, this is a very simple render, just a simple block. This time setting here will get progressively larger and larger as we have more and more complex objects. Now, one other setting you should be making sure to have, let's go back to the light manager. I'm just going to move this off the screen here. Make sure that all of these are off. We don't want those interfering with the light itself. And in fact, here is our spotlight that we just attached. And we can click on that and we'll see the values for that spotlight. Now, we really should rename that. Now, we're not going to at this point, but normally if you're lighting a scene, it's very important that you have specific names for the specific lights in order to identify them. Now, a couple of extra points. I didn't make a pre-select for this light. If I click on that, we'll see that incandescent 100 watts is already set. Now, we did do that in the last video. But if you want a specific light, then set that beforehand, or in fact afterwards. For example, if I change this to, say, a 15-watt fluorescent, even though it's a spotlight, let's render it again. we'll see that it's a little less bright, but the brightness value will allow us to bring it back up to full brightness or the brightness that we need. The brightness slider is really important in terms of deciding exactly what you need. And the other thing to note is that the cell size is 2. Now that's the physical size of the light icon here. If I change that to something else, let's say 0.25, which makes it actually 3 inches, you see it's changed here. And if I zoom in, you'll see a much smaller light symbol. So you can control that. Now this is not normally a problem because that does not print. And if you look at the render more closely, you'll see that there is no sign of that light icon at all, or the 2 lines that we placed with construction elements. So don't be afraid to use construction. They simply won't show up. So experiment with that a little bit. Try changing some of the values of this particular spotlight and see what effects you get.